Well, good evening, everyone. Nice to have you back with us. I'm going to play another virtual concert for you tonight, this evening without the chat interrupting the piano keys. This evening's performance is called Adam Plays the Million Sellers, and I borrowed this title from another old Johnny Maddox record. I've named a couple of my concerts after his old records, and I thought this would be a very fun idea. Adam Plays the Million Sellers, and when I talk about that, I mean both sheet music and records. And the song that is considered the birth of the modern popular music industry, well, I say modern, but that's relative, is a song called After the Ball from 1892. It's the symbolic birth of Tin Pan Alley, the music publishing business. And here is my original copy of this song, After the Ball, which is quite probably the very first piece of music to ever sell 1 million copies. It was written by Charles K. Harris, who wrote a lot of great old-time waltzes, songs in the 1890s, as you might call tearjerkers. And this one was definitely the first to sell 1 million copies. I'm going to play it for you, complete with the original verse to the song, which you don't hear very often. And this song was even used as the title of the concert that I played at Carnegie Hall when I was in New York City. So here is this famous piece of music. I normally play it as a medley with a bunch of other old-time waltzes, but I'm going to do it for you now with the original verse to the song. After the Ball, 1 million seller. Thank you very much. After the Ball. If you look on my YouTube channel, you can also see a film of the composer Charles K. Harris singing this song as an elderly man in the late 1920s. He was one of the most important pop songwriters and music publishers starting in the 1890s and then for several decades afterwards. But that was his biggest hit, and again, the first song to sell 1 million copies of piano sheet music. And as I typically do in many of my concerts, I'm going to go chronologically through the history of the music, and after that, the next tune coming up from 1899 is the classic rag by the one and only Scott Joplin from 1899. It's called the Maple Leaf Rag, and there's a lot of debate over whether this piece of music really sold 1 million copies. It may not have done so in Joplin's lifetime, but it did fairly quickly there afterwards. And the publisher, John Stark, claimed that this sold 1 million copies. So here's the Maple Leaf Rag, complete. This is my complete arrangement with all the key changes and things. I haven't played this in a while, so here's Joplin's Maple Leaf. Maple Leaf Rag. Thank you very much, folks. That was probably the first instrumental piece of music to sell 1 million copies. However, there is one competitor with that piece, which was written by the great Charles L. Jolson from Kansas City, Missouri, in 1906, originally published by Carl Hoffman. Later, another music publisher took it over because the piece of music became so popular. And that could be because it's one of the more easy to play rags. Again, from 1906. It's called the Dill Pickles Rag by Charles L. Jolson. I'm not sure whether this or Maple Leaf was really the first to sell 1 million. We may not know today, but what's important is that these were the most popular pieces of music of the period. Thank you so much. Dill, Pickles, Rag by Charles L. Johnson. My goodness, somebody just wrote earthquake in the YouTube chat. I hope you don't live in California. And I hope that's just a figure of speech regarding the music. I hope it's not actually happening to you. If so, stay safe. Okay, we're up to 114 viewers here on YouTube. That's terrific. Just in case you've never joined me before, I do accept virtual tips for these concerts, both on PayPal and Venmo. You can send in a small tip if you want to help with my career, and every little bit really does help. It's not easy to make a living playing music that is now at least 130 years old, and I'm very appreciative. Oh, I see. This person lives in Florida and says the camera was shaking. Yeah, I'm afraid that has been an issue for a while. That's because I set my camera on my desk when I'm performing, and I really have not figured out a better way to do it. It's partly because I don't want to change the way everything in my living room is. I don't want to change the look of the house. And Leo says it's fun when the camera shakes. Well, I hope you all see it that way. And thanks for joining me for tonight's concert called Adam Plays the Million Sellers. I named this after a couple of Johnny Maddox records that were on the Dot record label in the 1950s. In fact, it was such a popular album that Johnny made 3 of them. Johnny Maddox Plays the Million Sellers, Johnny Maddox Plays More Million Sellers, and Johnny Maddox Plays the Million Sellers Volume 3. There were 3 of these, and so I picked a number of the songs off these albums. And again, I don't necessarily know whether it was sheet music or records, but I imagine many of these songs you'll be hearing in tonight's concert are all very familiar songs. They were songs that were popular, very big hits. Hopefully you all enjoy this. And the next couple of songs I want to play for you are both old ragtime songs. The first one from 1914, the other from the Ziegfeld Follies of 1912. We're going to do the Abba Dabba Honeymoon, followed by Row, Row, Row. And the reason I'm including these is because both of these songs were done in a movie in the 1950s by Debbie Reynolds and Carlton Carpenter. Carlton became a good friend of mine. I got to have lunch and dinner with him in New York City one day. And the soundtrack from that movie was the first record that was a soundtrack from a movie to ever sell 1 million copies. So these songs were, at one time, a big hit, almost 75 years ago. Abba Dabba Honeymoon and Row, Row, Row. Thank you very much. Abba Dabba Honeymoon and Row, Row, Row. I know some funny words to row, 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 but I think I ought to keep those to myself tonight. That's kind of how that works. I'm always happy to take requests as well. If you have any requests, go ahead and send them in, and we'll see how many I can get to. As I mentioned, tonight's concert will be a lot of familiar tunes. That's one of my goals. And I'm going to be playing a lot of songs off those 3 Johnny Maddox albums called Johnny Maddox Plays the Million Sellers. And I'm not sure whether this one was a million seller in sheet music or records. Doesn't matter, it's a great tune. It was written in 1913 by Fred Fisher, who later on wrote a very famous piece of music called Chicago, That Toddlin' Town. And his daughter Doris Fisher was also an important songwriter who wrote a bunch of hits in the 1940s, like Put the Blame on Mame and You Always Hurt the One You Love. But this is a real early one called Peg o' My Heart by Fred Fisher. Here's Peg o' My Heart, complete with the original verse to the tune. Peg o' My Heart. Thank you very much. Another tune on one of those old albums was introduced by Al Jolson, who also introduced so many other big hits, probably many million-selling songs. I thought about doing my entire Al Jolson medley tonight, but I'm going to do this one by itself. I also know the verse to this song was written by, or at least in part, by Gene Schwartz, an important ragtime era songwriter who also wrote a big hit called Chinatown, My Chinatown. This one's from about 1918, and it's called Rockabye Your Baby with a Dixie Melody, another million-selling hit. Rockabye Your Baby. very much. Rockabye Your Baby with a Dixie Melody, one of the million-selling hits of Al Jolson. Well, we're up to 134 on YouTube. That's terrific. Let me make sure Facebook is working. Everything's working tonight. Isn't it terrific? No more chat on the screen. That distracted me a lot last week, but I think we're doing better tonight. Oh, my dad Scott says my parents would often ask Adam to play this, I guess. Huh, I didn't know that was one of their favorites. I have another piece of music sitting here on the piano that was an enormous hit of the ragtime years. In fact, it's another Al Jolson song. According to the sheet music cover, he introduced this at the Winter Garden Theater in New York, which is still there today. The song, I believe, was written in 1913. Yes, exactly right. Music by James V. Monaco, words by Joe McCarthy. Here's the original sheet music cover. You made me love you. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it. And I brought out the original music so I could play the verse for you too. You know, very often with these, what you might call standard songs, you don't hear the original verses to these songs. So here's You Made Me Love You. I didn't want to do it. Complete with the original verse to the tune. Thank you very much. You made me love you. I didn't want to do it. I I didn't want to do it. Well, let me see what's next on my list. I'm happy to take requests as always. I see one here in the chat right now that I might play. Toot Toot Tootsie Goodbye. That's not a bad idea. I'm not entirely sure it sold 1 million copies, but it doesn't matter because it was an enormous hit. I might do that for you next because I've been playing a bunch of Al Jolson songs. I think that would be appropriate. Let's do Toot Toot Tootsie, written in 1922, later sung by Al Jolson in the movie The Jazz Singer, 1927, one of the first movies with synchronized sound. Not exactly the first, but it was the first feature-length movie with synchronized sound, and I even know the verse to this tune, so let's do it. Toot Toot Tootsie Goodbye. We'll see what I can do with it. Thank you very much. Toot Toot Tootsie, goodbye. Well, I see another request here. I might play that in a little bit. The Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe, yeah. That certainly fits in for tonight's concert, but let me do a little bit slower number now. I think it's time for one of those. And this has been widely reported to be the first record that ever sold 1 million copies. In 1927, one of the greatest artists of the 1920s who had just a beautiful voice, Gene Austin, not to be confused with Gene Autry. I'm talking about Gene Austin, the crooner from Texas. And this song is called My Blue Heaven, written by Walter Donaldson. But Joe Bizarre, the famed record collector, told me that Vernon Dalhart's record of the Prisoner song sold millions several years before My Blue Heaven. And I'm sure he's right, because that was an incredibly popular song. You probably couldn't escape it in the 1920s. There's not much to it. But My Blue Heaven is more my style. The Prisoner's Song is kind of a, I have played it, but I think it's a little bit of a country song. Vernon Dalhart was one of the early hillbilly artists of the 20s. This is one of the first records that ever sold 1 million copies, probably the second or third in the world, at least as far as I can tell. Here's My Blue Heaven, and with it a song that was written by Glenn Rowell, the 1920s radio star who wrote the famous tune, I Get the Blues When It Rains. Johnny told me that Glenn was so sick of playing My Blue Heaven that he wrote a song where he turned the melody upside down. And it was published in the early 30s, and the tune is called What More Can I Do? So I made a medley out of My Blue Heaven and What More Can I Do? Thank you very much. My Blue Heaven. It's a gorgeous old song. Prior to tonight's concert, I got multiple requests. It's funny when that happens for the same song. It's great. I guess it means I got to play it. A song from the early 1920s, which was a huge hit for Paul Whiteman and his orchestra. Whiteman had a number of hits in the early 20s before he commissioned Gershwin to write Rhapsody in Blue. Songs like The Japanese Sandman and this one, which is called Whispering. And again, I even know the verse to the song. So this is answering multiple requests on Facebook prior to tonight's concert. Here is Whispering. Thank you very much. Whispering. Well, speaking of Facebook, I don't think I've checked the chat over here. Let me do that real quick. Making sure I try and catch all the requests here. Gotta check Twitch too. Give me just a second here. For heaven's sakes, Olympia Rag by Morton Gunnar Larson? No, don't know that by heart. do see a request for Canadian Capers. I could play that. If you're still listening on Twitch, let me do that. Canadian Capers, let's do it. The reason Canadian Capers fits in so well for tonight's concert is because it was an enormous hit. In fact, it was probably one of the only instrumental rags that was in print throughout the 20th century. It may not be today, but until early in the 21st century, it was still in print. That's how popular this piece was. It was written on the Barbary Coast in San Francisco by a black pianist named Sid Laprati. The tune was stolen from him. This is a well-known story and is documented in several interviews. But it was published either back in Chicago or New York, one of those important cities, and retitled Canadian Capers. Charles says, I always notice that Adam pauses a few seconds before he starts to play. That's right, because I got to think about what I'm doing, and I've got to rest occasionally in between these songs. I have to rest once in a while, but I'm doing pretty good tonight, and I'm so happy that I don't have that chat issue to mess with tonight. So here's the request on Twitch. Canadian Capers. Thank you so much. Canadian Capers. I've been playing that tune a little more often lately, and a couple of times I've said should have been named San Francisco Capers, because that's where it was written. The Barbary Coast in San Francisco was a little bit like Storyville in New Orleans. It was, shall we say, the red light district, and was shut down after not too many years, but very much like Storyville and New Orleans. A lot of the great ragtime piano players performed there over the years. I see a request for If I Didn't Care. If I knew the tune by heart, I'd play it for you. I'd have to go dig out the sheet music, but that is a beautiful tune, which sold 1 million copies. Let me see what's next on my list here. I've got a few more. I suppose I could go dig out the sheet music real quick. I might do that, but I want to play you another piece of music that's sitting here on my piano. And I believe this was written in 1920... Oh, sorry, it's 1931. It's called That's My Desire. And this song sold 1 million records a few years later when it was recorded by Frankie Laine, about 1949 or thereabouts. But this is the original edition from 1931, before Frankie Laine ever sang the song. It's called That's My Desire. And music was written by Helmy Cressa. What a name, Helmy. Helmy Cressa. One of the few things I know about him is that he was one of Irving Berlin's arrangers. Of course, Irving Berlin could not read music, so he had to have a lot of arrangers to take the tunes down for him. Words by Carol Loveday. Again, a 1 million selling record. That's My Desire. Let's see what I can do with it. I'm even going to play the verse to the tune. Here it goes. It's real pretty. Real pretty. much. That's My Desire. I learned that song a while back because two friends of mine, Andy and Lucille Size, that was their love song when they first met and got married in 1949. Andy's the man who had the 7.5-inch gauge railroad on the north end of town here in Durango. And I thought it was about time I played that song again, and I realized it was a million seller. So, you know what? Let me do the other one that's sitting right here on the piano. This is also from the early 30s. It's called Heartaches, and it was a huge hit. The record of this must have sold 1 million copies. It was Ted Weems and his orchestra did this, but the sheet music features Gene and Glenn on the cover. That's Gene Carroll and Glenn Rowell. And it became such a popular standard song, quote, standard, that even Patsy Cline recorded this. It's just a beautiful tune. Music by Al Hoffman, words by John Klenner, 1931. You don't often hear the original verse, so here's the tune complete with the verse. Heartaches. Da, 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 da. Okay, there's the rehearsal. Thank you so much. Heartaches. Well, it's already after 7 o'clock here in Durango, Colorado, and I usually do a second announcement during my concerts that I do accept virtual tips for these performances. All you have to do is send in a tip on PayPal or Venmo, and the PayPal and Venmo information is in the chat and the posting on all three websites. Even a little bit really helps with my career, especially during the winter when I don't have as much work. And I know most of you already know about this. I also have a P.O. box on my website. If you prefer to send a check and you don't trust PayPal, you can do that too. And unfortunately, there will not be a virtual concert next week. I'll be performing in Kansas City, though. I'm going to be doing 2 concerts in the Kansas City area and also working as the artist in residence for the Scott Joplin Foundation in Sedalia, Missouri for almost a week. So the next virtual concert will not be until February 16th. Unfortunately, I'm going to miss 2 Sundays And that's just because of my flight schedule. There's really not much you can do about it. And on February 16th, we will be just a couple of days past Valentine's Day. So the next virtual concert, I already have an idea in mind. It's going to be called Romantic Ragtime. I think that is fitting, and I'm definitely going to have my piano tuned before I do another virtual concert. I know it needs it fairly badly right now. It'll be nice to play a concert of really beautiful rags when the piano is freshly tuned. And by romantic ragtime, what I mean is tunes like Scott Joplin's Heliotrope Bouquet and the beautiful tango he wrote called Solace. I'll do pieces like Joseph Lamb's Ragtime Nightingale and others, maybe some other love songs, pieces like, Smoke It's in Your Eyes and plenty of beautiful tunes like that. So mark your calendars now for February 16th because unfortunately it's going to be a little while before I can do another virtual. And don't forget that I am producing the Durango Ragtime and Early Jazz Festival the first weekend of April. You can get your tickets now from the Durango Arts Center. You have to pay for the dinners separately if you want to do everything at the festival. And I don't think I mentioned this on previous broadcasts, but make sure you like and follow the Durango Ragtime Festival page on Instagram and Facebook. On Facebook, it's the Durango Ragtime and Early Jazz Festival. The Instagram username or handle, or whatever you call it, is just Durango Ragtime Festival. And I have hired a professional marketing man to work on the Durango Ragtime Festival. So if you follow those pages on social media, you will get to see a lot of fun pictures and videos that he's going to post over the next few weeks. I'm very encouraged that with his help, this festival will be a big success. So I hope to see many of you there. And I see some people tipping here in the chat. Thank you very much. You can actually tip right in the chat on YouTube, and I saw a few of those. I sure appreciate it. Let me see. Looking for a couple of requests. Otherwise, I will play whatever is next on my list. Let me see what I can do. Jim, I don't know My Happiness by heart. That must have been a multi-million seller, but I'm afraid I don't know it. Hello, My Baby, I could do that, sure. In the Mood, I'm sure that was a million seller, but sometimes I go chronologically through the history of the music, and so this fellow's asked for this multiple times, so let me do it. Hello, My Baby. If it wasn't a million seller, it had to be close, at least over time. Some songs took many years to become hits, you might say. And this one was written way back in 1899 by Joseph E. Howard. It was one of the first songs about the telephone, which had just been invented. Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal. Send me a kiss by wire. Honey, my heart's on fire. And once again, I know the verse to the song, which is not often heard. Thank you very much. I see a request for Who's Sorry Now. I could certainly do that. Pretty sure I could remember it by heart. I see a request here on Facebook for Changes. It's not by Zez Confrey. That was written by Walter Donaldson, I think. My most favorite that you play is Silver Swan Rag. Gee, I wish I could remember it. I'm glad it's your favorite. I think I've played that all of about twice in my life. Oh, Dave, you must mean Iola by Charles L. Johnson. Iola, not Lola. Iola has almost, unfortunately, I don't know it by heart, but the tune has almost the same melody as a tune from, I think, the 1940s called Playmates by Saxy Dowell. It's kind of interesting history on that. 12th Street Rag, I could do that too. Let's do 12th Street Rag, and then maybe Who's Sorry Now. 12th Street Rag is probably one of the few rags that sold 1 million copies over the years. It didn't sell 1 million right away. Again, this took years, and the piece was written in Fort Worth, Texas in 1914 by Hudie Bowman. Originally self-published, and then it became popular enough that the Jenkins Music Company in Kansas City bought it in 1917. And then years later, in 1948, Pee Wee Hunt and his Dixieland Jazz Band made a record of this that sold well over 1 million copies. So here is a big hit called the 12th Street Rag. Thank you very much. The 12th Street Rag. I was kind of wondering whether I'd have to play that tonight, and sure enough, I got a request for it. Don't play Ragtime Fast My Foot. I wonder if Scott Joplin really wrote that on his music. I think it was probably the music publisher, and even if he did, Joplin was the only composer of that era, the only ragtime composer, period, who really wanted his music played that way. I suppose Joseph Lamb might be a close second. His music was much more European and romantic and so forth, but James Scott's music was very virtuosic, so he really didn't write music that sounds good played slow. I remember Johnny used to say Maple Leaf Rag sounded like a funeral dirge played slowly. Oh, I see a couple of tunes here I promised a few people. Okay, don't let me forget, I need to do the Darktown Strutters Ball and Wolverine Blues by Jelly Roll Morton. But first, let's do Who's Sorry Now? Of course, this is originally a waltz, but as so often happened in the 1920s, it was played as both a waltz and a foxtrot. So that's what I'll do for you. I believe this tune was written by Ted Snyder, who was an important music publisher. He also wrote the Wild Cherries Rag and a little minor hit called The Sheik of Araby. And this was written in conjunction with Calmer and Ruby, who later wrote a lot of the music for the Marx Brothers. 1923, Who's Sorry Now, revived in the late 1950s by Connie Francis, who's still around. She lives down in Florida. I've been following her on Facebook. There's somebody I'd really love to meet is Connie Francis. She sang many, many songs of the Great American Songbook in addition to the 50s rock and roll. That's why I like her very much, and did write her a letter, and she autographed a picture for me. So I like to play this tune in honor of Connie Francis as well. Like I said, that's somebody I'd love to meet. Here's Who's Sorry Now? Thank you very much. A quick version of Who's Sorry Now? Yeah. Oh my, I see request for Tiger Rag too. I could certainly play that. There's a couple of more I promised a few people. Let me remind myself what they were. Let me see. Oh, Darktown Strutters Ball. I could do that. Let's do that and then Wolverine Blues. Got a request from my friend in England to play a song. I think I played this about 2 weeks ago, but it doesn't matter. Because this was one of the most enormous hits of the ragtime era, written by Shelton Brooks, who wrote a lot of hits in the ragtime years. As far as I know, he never wrote any instrumental rags, but he wrote so many ragtime songs that were big hits. They may not be well remembered today, but they were at the time. Songs like I Wonder Where My Easy Rider's Gone, and All Night Long, and Walkin' the Dog, and this tune from 1917, The Darktown Strutter's Ball. Thank you so much. The Darktown Strutter's Ball. It's such a great tune. And with it, another song from the same year, Jada, 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 Jing, 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 written by Bob Carlton of Chicago, Illinois. Both tunes out of Chicago. I did an entire concert devoted to the music of that city recently. I suppose it wouldn't hurt to tell you the parodies on Jada, because that song may have more parodies than any other song ever written. The best one is Matches, Matches, M-A-T-C-H-E-S, Matches, Matches, M-A-T-C-H-E-S. You can light them on wood, you can light them on glass. I knew a girl who could light them on her. Matches, Matches, M-A-T-C-H-E-S. Sarah, Sarah, she wore a pair of BVDs. Sarah, Sarah, they hung way below her knees. She wore them in the summer and she wore them in the fall. During spring and autumn, la 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 la. She wore them, she tore them. She tore a pair of BVDs. That's Jada. And then the next request, this probably wasn't a million seller, but I'm going to play it anyway, because the request came from two of my regular listeners, Carl and Amy Lundgren. They want to hear Jelly Roll Morton's Wolverine Blues. Again, I think I played this not long ago, but it's so good. And this was undoubtedly one of the most popular tunes that Jelly Roll Morton ever wrote. It's a shame that I think the most artistic music often does not sell many copies, but Jelly Roll Morton's Wolverine Blues came out in 1923 and was recorded by many other groups of the period. In fact, Bix Beiderbecke's band, the Wolverines, was named after this piece of music. It was also recorded by the New Orleans Rhythm Kings. It was the closest thing Jelly Roll probably had to a hit. So here's the Wolverine Blues. Tambourine Blues. There you go. That's for Carl and Amy. Dave Goodlaxon says, I did read the music publishers of the day were trying to get their pieces to appeal to more players. Of course they were. They were trying to make money, just like everybody else in the music business. In fact, that's why there are so many misnomers about the ragtime and early jazz era, is because the music was so greatly simplified for the people who were buying the sheet music. The composers of the music were these African-American geniuses who played in bordellos, who could play any piece of music in the most difficult keys after hearing it one time. But the people who bought the sheet music were teenage girls at home who were not that skilled. And of course the great musicians in New York City who were virtuoso pianists could play this music on a high level. Say Eubie Blake, for instance. Well, his music was greatly simplified for the public that bought the music, and that's why you have to listen to the records and the piano rolls as well to understand the style of that era. You can't just get it from the sheet music. Yes, the sheet music is wonderful and helpful, but you have to learn the music from other sources as well. I see a piece of music on my list which was definitely a million seller. This piece was written in 1931 by J. Fred Coots and a couple of lyricists from England, Charles and Nick Kinney. I think they both contributed to the lyrics. And there's quite a history behind this song. Let me tell you a little bit about it. Again, the song was written in 1931. It was a fair hit at the time, but then in the 1950s, a number of artists recorded this on Dot Records. Now, my friend Johnny Maddox was the first artist on Dot Records, and he recorded the song. He also suggested the song for the country singer Mac Wiseman, who recorded the song. And then a guy you may have heard of named Pat Boone, who's still around, even doing XM radio shows these days. Pat Boone had an enormous hit on this in, I think, 1957 or thereabouts, which sold 1 million copies. So the song is called Love Letters in the Sand, and it's kind of interesting that so many of the Dot Records artists did this tune. I didn't realize that until more recently. I also have an original copy of this song, autographed by the lyricists Charles and Nick Kinney, for the 1920s and 30s radio star Glenn Rowell, which Johnny gave to me. So, and I have the 1950s copy that Pat Boone signed for me. So there's quite a history behind this song. And I made a medley out of the song with another tune written by Glenn Rowell and J. Fred Coots called In the Doorway Where We Used to Kiss Goodnight. So here's the famous Love Letters in the Sand and In the Doorway Where We Used to Kiss Goodnight. Thank you very much. Love Letters in the Sand, another million-selling hit with a tune called In the Doorway, Where We Used to Kiss Goodnight. I do not know for sure whether In the Doorway, whether the music was ever even published. I would love to find out for certain. All I know is that the tune must have been known by a few musicians, because I have recordings of Glenn playing it, I have recordings of Johnny playing it, and I have a couple of manuscripts of the tune that Johnny gave me, written by very important songwriters, J. Fred Coots and Glenn Rowell. I don't know whether the tune was ever published. I know it was registered for copyright. You can find that on Google, but I've never seen any typeset sheet music for it, only the manuscript. Well, as I often like to do in my concerts, I like to go chronologically through the music, and here's a tune which was a huge hit now in the late 1940s, written for a movie called The Third Man with Orson Welles. In fact, I think this is my favorite Orson Welles movie. It's easier to understand than Citizen Kane. This song was written for an instrument called the zither, written by an Austrian composer, and it's called The Third Man Theme with a little extra ragtime in it. Here we go. Thank you very much. The Third Man Theme. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this concert of million-selling songs, and I will be back 3 weeks from tonight with another virtual concert, and thankfully I'll be able to get the piano tuned. It won't sound quite so honky-tonk, but while we're at it, why don't I play one last million-selling song? Here's the Beer Barrel Polka.
Don't poke it.
Thank you very much, folks. Appreciate you listening tonight. Hope you've enjoyed this concert of Adam Plays the Million Sellers. And thank you very much for the virtual tips. As always, it's greatly appreciated. Not only should you get your tickets for the Durango Ragtime Festival, but follow us on social media too. Hit that like button. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, both my personal pages and the Durango Ragtime Festival. Please join me February 16th online for another virtual concert, which is going to be called Romantic Ragtime in honor of Valentine's Day. Hope to see all of you then. Thanks again for listening, and good night for now, folks.